So remember earlier when we talked about I really don't know what it is to be afraid, right? And I don't mean that bragging. It's gotten me in as much trouble, as anything. But I was in Kauai, I believe, in Hawaii about 12 years ago, something like that. Yeah, and I saw a movie called Poisoned Paradise. Has anybody seen that? Yeah, a few. Well, you should check it out because that was my inspiration. It's when I first heard the word glyphosate. I had known what Roundup, but the first time I heard the word glyphosate. And I came home. I said, this is terrible. We got to do something about this. And I prayed about it. Everybody out there ever pray? And the way it works is within about 2 months, I met one person who had worked for, the guy who trained Linus Pauling. Anybody know who that guy was? What was his name? Albert St. Georgi, right? Well, Albert St. Georgi had actually created a product to heal the lining of cows' guts. And then I met another guy. Anyway, 3 different parts that never knew each other were introduced to me within 3 months. And I told her, I said, if these 3 things came together, we could bind the glyphosate, and then we could denature the glyphosate, and then we could move it out of the body. She says, well, how will anybody believe us? I said, well, we got to run a clinical trial.
And
she
then I said, well, how are we going to pay for that?
I said, we have to. And we did. And that clinical trial showed that these 3 ingredients could reduce glyphosate by almost 75% within only 6 weeks, even if the people continue to eat the standard American diet. They don't have to start eating organic to make this work, but I wish they would. And as a corroboration, we know that one of the reasons why glyphosate is so toxic to the body is because it causes massive inflammation, especially to our organs. Okay? And so the study also proved that C-reactive protein was reduced 75%. Remember, glyphosate was reduced a little less than 75%, and then C-reactive protein was exactly 75%. Well, tell me about a corroboration that one might be associated with the other. Well, the next woman who's going to come up on stage, Amy, actually, established the relationship and invited her here. And I'm really happy for that because she has been she's been preaching this and very knowledgeable about it and making the world aware of it. People who never ever heard the word before. She walks into a room and has to tell them about something that's in, 70 to 80% of their food that they're buying for their families and 90% of the beverage they're buying for their families. And she's probably not received as well as she is going to be here. So let's give a huge round of applause for this woman warrior, Carey Gillam.
Awesome.
You call me a warrior? Thank you. You look beautiful. You're all back together.
So I just want to say, Dave became very educated about glyphosate, and I was like, I don't know anything about glyphosate except that my parents sprayed Roundup all over their yard, and my uncle sprayed it all over his crops. And so I got your book, Whitewash.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I got the book Whitewash, and I listened to it on audiobook. I couldn't stop it. I listened to it like from top to bottom, and or front to back. And I was just blown away. I was blown away by you. I was blown away by your courage to go up against such powerful forces in the world.
Thank you.
And I did a thing. I reached out to you years ago and I said, would you come on and do a Facebook Live with me? And you said yes. And I actually couldn't believe it. And so I think that was in 2017.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And
yeah.
so when we were having this conference again about renewal, I just knew you had to be here. So you've got a new book called the Monsanto Papers. You're going to tell us all about it and what you've been battling and unveiling the truth for all these years. So thank you so much for being who you are and being with us here today.
Oh my gosh, and thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much. I'm so happy to be here. Teach me how to click. Oh, my face is coming untaped. Okay. It's not going to stay taped. Thank you so much. I have to say, this is such an unusual experience for me because I have been doing a lot of public speaking since my first book came out, Whitewash, in 2017. But in a lot of those early 2017, 2018, 2019, nobody knew what glyphosate was. Nobody, and frankly, when the publisher approached me to write this first book in 2015 and said, you're writing for Reuters, you're writing all these stories and uncovering really interesting information about pesticides and agrochemicals, and would you write a book? And my very first response was, God, no, right? No one is going to want to read a book about pesticides, and particularly something called glyphosate that no one's ever heard of. But ended up doing it, and the journey began, and thank God I'm now in a room where I think every single person knows what it is, right? And so a little bit about my background, I guess Amy wanted me to share with you. So, I did come to this work sort of just by accident. I've been a journalist for a long, long time, 30-some years, 40 years, long time. And it was in 1998, I was living in Atlanta, and I was covering the banking community and thought that was very important. And Reuters, the international news agency, asked me to move to Kansas City and start covering this company called Monsanto and agriculture and this revolutionary sort of new thing, genetically modified crops that Monsanto was introducing to be used with its very, safe and wonderfully effective herbicide called glyphosate. And do other things and write about the rest of the agrochemical industry and agriculture and how important it was to the economy. This agriculture is incredibly important, right? It feeds all of us and people around the world. And so I moved to Kansas and began this journey. And I didn't know what I was getting into, I'll tell you that. I've, over these many, many years since I started writing about agrochemicals and agriculture and food and farming, I have spent so much time with farmers, literally been in hundreds of farm fields from North Dakota to Texas and Florida to California and all around. And I've spent time with scientists and academics, regulators. I've interviewed regulators top at the EPA and others in USDA. And I used to spend quite a lot of time with people at Monsanto and Syngenta and DuPont because they wanted me, I was writing about their company and their chemicals, and they wanted me to come into their offices and see their field trials and see their new cool corn chipper and how it worked. And they really wanted me and all of the other reporters who were writing about them to write about it from their perspective and how they were feeding the world and how important these tools were that they were bringing to farmers. So, I've really had quite an education in this. Through this journey, Monsanto stopped inviting me into its headquarters. And as I began to learn that a lot of the things that they were teaching the media were not necessarily true, and a lot of the things that were happening out in the farm fields with changes to soil health and impact on biodiversity and weed resistance and water quality, and a lot of evidence was building that these chemicals, and particularly glyphosate, which was becoming the most widely used and is now currently and has been for many years the most widely used herbicide in the world, that it was doing a lot of damage environmentally. And then we started seeing the science build that it was doing damage to our health. And that really unfriended me with Monsanto as I was writing about that. So today I'm going to take you through some of that, some of what I've learned, some of what I've reported, some of what Monsanto came to really dislike about me. There were times through this journey where, I've been stalked. I've literally stalked online and in person. I've been harassed. I've had lies spread about me on the internet. I'd kind of forgotten, but as I was waiting to come on, and Amy was like, "Tell them about what you've been through," Well, with the first book, with Whitewash, I got about 50 pages of internal documents that were from Monsanto, and I actually wrote a column in The Guardian about it. You could read it, but it was astonishing the levels that Monsanto went to try to discredit my first book, Whitewash, when it was coming out. Hiring a consulting company in DC, to spread misinformation about the book and to get third parties to put fake Amazon reviews, and just all of this stuff for this little old person who lives in Kansas with 3 kids who writes stories, And I'm like, if they're going after me like this, what are they doing to other people? What are they doing to the scientists and the academics and the other journalists? And so, it's a story not just about the chemical and not just about what it can do to your health, but it's a bigger story too about how these companies manipulate the information, manipulate the science, manipulate what the public knows, and really just try to control the narrative. And so it's people like you who are engaged and informed and actively out there, telling other people, and not only about the dangers, but about the solutions. So I feel very grateful to be here. That's a very long entrance, isn't it? Let's see if I can move on to the actual presentation. So this is my second book, The Monsanto Papers. The first book, I'm amazed that Amy got through it. I'm skeptical she actually did, but it's a super academic, a lot of data, a lot of heavy reading in it. This book, I wanted it to be completely different, and I wrote it much like fiction, tried to make it sort of fiction, although every word is true. But it's a story about accountability, but it's the story of the very first trial that took place in the Roundup litigation. And the man, Lee Johnson, we'll get to him, Lee, who was the very first plaintiff to go up against Monsanto in trial. And I don't know if anybody of you followed that, it was in San Francisco. It was very dramatic. A lot of twists and turns, and as I lived through this with the different players, I knew it had to be a book. I thought it actually should be a movie, and it actually is going to be a movie. Maybe, they've got Netflix is thinking they've got a movie, and there are a lot of actors and actresses signed up. I'm not part of it. I'm wishing I was, but I'm just watching it. But it's a crazy ride, and so if you do read the book, I hope you'll enjoy it. It's a lot easier to read than Whitewash. But Lee Johnson, hardworking guy, pulled himself up by the bootstraps, had a really hard life growing up. He didn't have a dad in his life, barely had a mom, didn't really finish school, got into trouble with the law, just kind of that story. But he found a great job as a groundskeeper for a school district, and his job was to spray chemicals on the schoolyards, right, and the playgrounds where the kids would play sports or would recreate during school. And it was a good job. And he got married, and he had 2 kids, and he could afford a little house. And he was just so proud and so hardworking. And then you see in the book, and you follow with him, one day he has this really catastrophic accident. He's mixing up Ranger Pro, which is another glyphosate Monsanto product. There are a lot of different names. Most people call it Roundup, but Ranger Pro, and he has this accident. He's completely doused in this chemical, in glyphosate. And, he starts to see changes in his skin. He's worried. He starts to get lesions. He actually calls Monsanto to say, "Can you tell me if this is dangerous? Could this have hurt me in some way?" And, you can see from internal Monsanto files that they discuss whether or not they should call him back, and they don't ever call him back, and he continues spraying. And eventually, his entire body is covered in lesions like this. And these are pictures I felt like I could show. But in all of the days and hours and weeks and time I spent with Lee, there were so many times that I just couldn't hardly stop from crying. Some of these things went down to the bone. It was a form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma that manifests in the skin and literally just was eating him away. Very, very painful. He was given 18 months to live. And this is how he became the very first plaintiff in the trial, because they didn't think that he was going to live very long. Monsanto did actually argue to delay the trial because their experts thought he might live about 2 years instead of 18 months. And so they thought he didn't need a speedy trial, but the judge decided otherwise. So these are just some of the other players you'll encounter if you read the book. The lawyers that were involved, Mike Miller and Amy, and they really are like characters out of a movie. They're just kind of like crazy and eccentric, and there's so many plot twists, and I'm going to just move on here because I don't want to ruin the book. But Mike Miller, the lead attorney on this case, suffers a near-fatal accident just on the eve of trial after he has worked so hard to put this case together and spent so much time. And it nearly derails the case. And it was just, as I said, there were so many plot twists in this thing. It was crazy. So here we go, glyphosate. Let's get into it, right? You all probably know all this better than I do at this point, but glyphosate was introduced by Monsanto in the 1970s, roughly 1974 in the United States. Much safer, truly, than many other herbicides that were being used by farmers and others. Paraquat, if you guys, another widely used. Paraquat, if you accidentally ingest a little bit of paraquat, teaspoon splashes up in your mouth, you swallow it, you're going to be dead in a couple of weeks. Like, it is acutely toxic. Glyphosate was not like that. And farmers welcomed it. And Monsanto really pushed this hard. So safe enough to drink, not going to hurt, safe for pets and people. And use of it expanded pretty widely. It was also highly effective, really did knock those weeds out. I used to love it. I mean, I used to use it all the time before I knew what I was doing. And so it expanded. And then when Monsanto's patent was about to expire, it miraculously came up with this genius idea that they could genetically engineer these different crops so that the crops could withstand being sprayed directly with glyphosate, and the weeds would die, but the crops would not. And farmers loved it. It made their life so much easier. And so glyphosate use skyrocketed, and we're now at about 300 million pounds a year of glyphosate just in the United States. It's so widely used, it's pretty much ubiquitous, it's pervasive. You guys have heard all this, I'm sure you know it. It's not only in the food you eat, it's in the air you breathe, it's in the water, it's in the rainfall. It's really, really difficult to escape, which is something that has served the companies that sell it, Bayer, which now owns Monsanto, really, really well. Glyphosate has been used, you probably know this, in producing. A lot of people just think, they spray it on corn and soybeans and cotton and, these genetically engineered crops. But glyphosate is used with a whole host of food crops that aren't genetically engineered at all. Farmers are encouraged to desiccate their crops. Oats, wheat. Oats are not genetically engineered. Wheat is not genetically engineered to tolerate glyphosate. And yet, again, I have the little black glossy brochure that Monsanto came up with this cool idea that farmers should just dry down their crops before harvesting it by spraying it with glyphosate. And so what you end up with is some pretty high residues in some of these foods that they desiccate, particularly oatmeal. I remember finding documents from the FDA that showed high levels of glyphosate in baby food oatmeal because the oats are being desiccated. Now, the industry is starting to move away from that, like as more publicity has come around about glyphosate residues in foods. A lot of the mills and the distributors are starting to tell their farmers not to do that. They don't like it. But this is pretty representative. Even though it's 10 years old now, this was data that I was able to dig out of an old EPA file that shows, you can see it's used with so many different things. Almonds, my gosh, 2.1 million pounds used in growing almonds every year. So things that you think are super healthy, you wouldn't think about being associated with this chemical. So we have, I'm just going to dump some scientific studies on you. These are different ways, different things that we have seen where you have proof that it is in our air and our water. Rising human exposure as glyphosate has gone up, exposure has gone up. We've seen it, I'm sure, you've heard about, urine testing. If you get your urine tested for glyphosate, now maybe not you guys, but the general population, finding glyphosate in your urine is a pretty common thing. It's found in U.S. streams and rivers, air samples, both in France and in Brazil, they've found in recent studies. We have, my eyes are so bad. This is a study that I wrote about. This is data from the CDC, and this story really made Bayer, the owner of Monsanto, mad. They still just cannot bear it when you have stories out there like this. But this was one, CDC data, how are you going to argue with it? But they really didn't like it. But 80% of urine samples drawn from children in the U.S. Were found to contain glyphosate levels. And these are about 2,300 samples that the CDC looked at, and a third of them were from children, age 6 to 18. So, I don't know about you guys, but this whole journey, the data and the research, anything that pertains to children, it just really resonates with me. Because I feel like this legacy that we're leaving our kids, is so important, and we kind of owe it to our kids, right? To try to clean up our environment so that they aren't having these chemicals in their blood and their urine. You are aware, I'm sure, if you know the glyphosate story, how this all blew up was in 2015 when the International Agency for Research on Cancer declared glyphosate a probable human carcinogen. And again, I had been writing about sort of the building drumbeat and the research that was coming together, epidemiology and toxicology from all around the world. And this group, IARC, they don't do new research. They look at published peer-reviewed research that has already been done. And so glyphosate was the most widely used weed killer. They were seeing all the information that was in data or in air and water and food, and so they decided to do a carcinogenicity analysis of it. And this is what they came up with. And you can see that they conclude that there was strong evidence for genotoxicity. And this was both in glyphosate and the glyphosate formulations. And this is something that you guys may have already talked about as well or understand, but glyphosate by itself is one thing, but when you put it actually in a product, in Roundup or Ranger Pro or other things, it can become even sort of more toxic because of the things that it's being mixed with. The surfactants can make it more easily absorbed into your body. It can have so many more ramifications from these other chemicals that it's being mixed with. But what we have found is that our regulators, the Environmental Protection Agency, and regulators in Europe as well, don't require all of these battery of safety testings on the actual formulations. They simply tell the companies, just look at the active ingredient, glyphosate, give us your studies, we're going to look at those, and we're not going to worry about the formulations, which, a lot of scientists just find baffling. So this is a study. Did I go the right way? I did, yeah. So this is a study that came out of the University of Washington. And again, it's just, one of many over the years that have established a connection between glyphosate or glyphosate formulations and cancer, particularly non-Hodgkin lymphoma. But 41% increased risk. Leanne Shepard at the University of Washington, I remember I talked to her about this when this came out, and she had no idea that publishing this study, she published so many different studies, she had no idea the attacks that were going to rain down on her, the blowback. Monsanto went after her, they tried to get her fired, they tried to get this paper retracted. She was stunned and really has been brave about trying to go forward. But again, an example of you put out evidence, you put out science, and they come after you. This is another study. I'll try to get through these pretty quickly, but tying it to endocrine disruption. That's a really big problem with glyphosate and with a lot of chemicals that we are exposed to in our environment. Endocrine disruption can just wreak havoc on a whole array of bodily functions. And we're seeing so many problems, right, with fertility issues, dropping levels of testosterone in people, reproductive harms, birth defects, and scientists who study this really do think that these endocrine disrupting chemicals are playing a very significant role in a whole host of sort of reproductive and hormone-related problems with our health. A few more studies, and then we're going to get rid of studies. So, more of these diseased liver. A lot of these are the toxicology. They've been done in animals, rats, and mice. One that really recently came out as part of the global glyphosate study, which I don't know if you guys follow that at all. It's out of Italy. It's the Ramazzini Institute, and they are doing a whole sort of host of really in-depth analysis of glyphosate and glyphosate formulations. And this is their most recent that came out. And it's really pretty alarming because, what they're finding is that exposure to glyphosate levels at levels that regulators consider to be safe are having these effects and creating these tumors in the animals that translate to, kidney, skin, liver, thyroid, pancreatic cancers. So they're really raising the alarm. Again, the industry is pushing back and saying this is not good science, this is invalid, but it's published and it's peer-reviewed. So we're continuing to watch the Ramazzini Institute. This is sort of the fun part, I guess, or maybe not fun, the part that has enraged me. So a lot of my work in both my first book and my second book was based on documents, right? Internal corporate files from Monsanto, internal EPA documents, a lot of things I got through Freedom of Information Act requests. A lot of the internal files from Monsanto, if they were communicating with the regulators, we could get them that way. If they were solely internal, most of those came through litigation. And I was able to have some good sources to share information on that. So I'm just going to share a few of these that I talk about in the book and that have been used in the litigation to win, billions of dollars actually now by different plaintiffs. So, here's one that has been very commonly used. Donna Farmer, who still works at Bayer. She's been 30 years with Monsanto and now with Bayer. You see her saying this is in 2003. You cannot say Roundup is not a carcinogen. We have not done the necessary testing on the formulations. And that's just kind of underscoring what I had said earlier, that they were never required to really do this type of testing, to see, do these things that we're putting out and selling to the world, do they cause cancer? They didn't do the tests, and she's talking about it right there. You have it, oops. You have an email, again, this is in 2002. This is when all of this stuff is building. This is an email from Bill Heidens, who was another top scientist at Monsanto. And they were trying to get new approvals in Europe at this time, but they were doing these studies that were showing this higher rate of dermal absorption, that this just really could get into your skin and get into your blood system and get into your body at a level that they had not told regulators. And he's really worried about this, and he's worried it's going to blow up their Roundup risk evaluations. So this one I wanted to share because this is really, again, sort of emblematic of what you see through all of these communications. I've thousands and thousands and thousands of pages that I have read through. You never, ever see them say, I'm really worried about what this might do for our customers, or really worried about the impact this might have on someone's health. What you see is, I'm really worried about what this might do for our profits or for our sales, or how do we protect our freedom to operate? What are we going to tell regulators so that we don't get hindered in any way? And that's not probably, unique to Monsanto in any way. It's sort of the corporate, right, mode of operation, profits above all else. It's the American way. But I sort of feel like Monsanto is the poster child for this sort of thing, at least in the companies that I've covered, and the internal documents that you see in the conversations. This is another set of emails. This is before Monsanto's, before the International Agency for Research on Cancer, IARC, was going to review glyphosate. And you see them talk about not what they were saying publicly, like, oh, we're so confident. We know that our product is so safe and it will be great. That's not what they're saying internally. What they're saying is, oh my God, like, this is not good. We have been worried about this for a really long time. And we have vulnerability, epidemiology, exposure, genotox, mode of action. And you see them, before IARC even comes out with its classification, we were able to track in these internal communications how they developed a plan of attack, that they were going to take it down, they were going to discredit the scientists. You see that they were planning that they were going to get either a possible or a probable human carcinogen rating on glyphosate. They knew it, they knew the science, they knew what the rating was going to be, and they planned to attack it even before it ever came out. One of the ways that they wanted to do that is what they call ghostwriting. And this was just really like, wow, like in their own internal files, they talk about ghostwriting. And that's the term that they use. And one of the ones that still kind of makes my jaw drop, if I can, whenever I talk about it, was this in the late 1990s, going into the year 2000, they saw the evidence building, right, of all of the, could cause cancer, can cause reproductive harm, all of these issues, and they wanted to have a very large, very important scientific paper published that would just discredit all of everything and just would say, this is super safe, totally safe. Couldn't be written by Monsanto because nobody would believe it. So they get 3 scientists who are independent to author these scientific papers. And the one big one, William Crows and Monroe. And they go through this whole thing, and they spent basically 3 years. You see these internal documents, that they spend 3 years writing, editing, putting all this information together for this independent paper. And they say this is gonna be like the big daddy. This is gonna be, we're gonna use this in our defensive Roundup. We're gonna use this, to protect our freedom to operate. And it comes out, and it's authored by Gary Williams, Robert Crows, Ian Monroe, none of whom work for Monsanto. Doesn't say in there Monsanto spent 3 years on it. Doesn't say it had 17 scientists involved in it. But what it does say is Roundup poses no risk to humans, no effects on fertility or reproductive. Glyphosate is non-carcinogenic. And this became the fundamental foundational paper with regulators all around the world. And it was something that Monsanto had ghostwritten, and nobody knew it. And until these documents came out many, many years later. But it was just one example of ghostwriting. But it was such a phenomenal one. And I wrote a story about this. They talk about, they were so proud of themselves for all of the hard work they did on these independent papers. And they don't even see like the hypocrisy in that they had little Roundup polo shirts, like celebratory, and they had a little party, and they gave their scientists these little special shirts to celebrate how they had ghostwritten this independent paper. So this all came up again when IARC came out with its classification, because they said, remember what we did with William Crows and Monroe? Let's do it again. Let's ghostwrite some papers so that we can discredit these scientists with IARC. And we'll ghostwrite exposure and genotox. We'll keep the cost down. We'll do the writing. They just edit and sign their names. Remember, that's how we handled William Crows and Monroe. It's just, I don't know, still makes me shake my head a little bit. Like the duplicity, the deception is just so ingrained. And so they published these papers discrediting these international cancer scientists, saying how they're wrong. And the papers say, again, neither any Monsanto company employee, they specifically say they didn't have anything to do with it, when the documents show the very opposite. Some more examples of ghostwriting, and then I'll get off of it, I guess. But this was a Stanford University guy. Like, they didn't just ghostwrite scientific papers. There's a whole list of academics that they would get to put their names on articles, and the evidence shows that they were having, articles written in magazines, online. They had online forums that were by nutritionists or, professors of, whatever. And they had actually had their PR firm write it, and then they just had the academic's name on it so that it would look official. They had a team of people in DC that would write letters to the editors, to newspapers around the country, looking like they came from regular people, not knowing that they actually came from a PR company paid for by Monsanto. This is deposition testimony in 2019 where he talked about that, where he talks about, letters to the editor to respond to articles about glyphosate that were negative. These will be authored by people on a special list and then placed by Potomac and media where needed. It's just all part of a plan to deceive us. And I think this is my last one on ghostwriting. John Vincini. This was about GMOs. It wasn't even about glyphosate. So they don't even just ghostwrite about that. He's worried because there's evidence that GMO feed might be harming livestock. And so he's put a paper together, but he can't find an author who wants to put their name on it. He's having a hard time finding somebody just take something they did not produce and slap their names on it. It was crazy. And then you see the EPA getting involved. There's a part, I think I put this in the first book, maybe in the second, where after IARC comes out, our National Toxicology Program, and it's an agency within HHS, is going to do its own review of glyphosate and say, IARC has found that it can cause cancer, probable human carcinogen. We want to look at it as well. And Monsanto freaks out and does not want them to look at it. And so what do? You see them immediately contact top chief at the EPA. We need your help. We need to stop this. And I was a little stunned by this because you see in the very first emails, they emailed like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and like by 4:30, you see the email from the EPA chief to his second in command going, hey, can you get on this? They're responding to these calls from Monsanto like in 20 minutes. And they work through this, and they eventually do get this other agency to put a halt to its review of glyphosate. Jess Rowland, I don't know if you've heard of Jess Rowland. He was in charge of the cancer review for the EPA of Monsanto's glyphosate products. And he got very cozy with Monsanto, and they have lots of interesting interactions in these emails. He was part of this effort to try to get this other agency not to review glyphosate. And you see them discussing in here, Jess told me if I can kill this, I should get a medal. And then they talk about how Jess is going to be retiring from the EPA. He'll be very useful to us as we move forward in our defensive. These are EPA officials that are supposed to be protecting the public, right, and working on behalf of public health and environmental health. And what we see time and time again, this is definitely not an isolated incident, is that they are not. They're working for the industry. They're very cozy with industry. We just had a guy who was a lobbyist with the American Soybean Association move into a regulatory position within the EPA about a month ago. And we just saw the EPA decide to reapprove a banned herbicide, not glyphosate, but dicamba, after this industry lobbyist was brought into the EPA. So it's happening all the time. This is in the prior Trump administration. Monsanto had hired a consulting company to go gauge, the support level within the Trump administration. And this memo from the White House, we have Monsanto's back on pesticides. So we can't look to our federal government for much protection, I think. Just a couple more things here. The Ninth Circuit, there have been several challenges to the EPA and to the government's view of glyphosate and their assessment, and courts have repeatedly found this is completely separate from people suing over cancer. These are groups suing saying, you're the EPA and you're not following the law. You're not doing your job correctly to review this for cancer. And the courts have repeatedly found that that is correct, that the EPA is violating its job. Another aspect of the deception, these is where it gets crazy, the front groups. I don't know if you guys have heard of these groups or if you've seen them online. I mean, some of them Campaign for Accuracy in Public Health Research, American Council on Science and Health. These groups sound really like informative and really focused on your health. And you wouldn't know probably that they get money from the chemical companies, right? And they get direction from the chemical companies, and they are very on board with trying to support, glyphosate, and not only glyphosate, but other pesticides and other chemicals. But they have these really official, wonderful sounding names, and people get sucked in, and they believe it, until maybe they see emails like this: American Council on Science and Health, writing to Monsanto, asking for more money. It says, each and every day we work hard to prove our worth to companies like Monsanto. And then you see Monsanto writing, talking about, hey, should we give them some money? You will not get a better value for your dollar than ACSH. And this, again, is a group that's online that people think that they could get reliable information from. So until we expose these things, these are some of the things that you would see from the American Council on Science and Health. I'm not the only reporter that they didn't like. Danny Hakim from the New York Times is lying to you. Eric Lipton from the New York Times, Pulitzer Prize winner, is a science birther. Carey Gillam is a huge liar. This is one of many articles that these front groups have had about me. I'm a liar. I'm like a Russian agent who wants to undermine faith in the food supply. What else do? I secretly take money under the table from lawyers, all sorts of things like that. This is a scientist who sat on the International Agency for Research on Cancer, Chris Portier. Boy, they really didn't like Chris Portier. They've gone after him. Again, lying. They need like different words, but they like the word lying quite a bit. This is a quote. I love this quote from Vin Chabria. He was the judge over the massive multi-district litigation of Roundup. He started out pretty skeptical, but once he was really into this, there's a fair amount of evidence the only thing Monsanto cared about was undermining the people who were raising concerns about whether Roundup caused cancer. Monsanto didn't seem concerned at all about getting at the truth of whether glyphosate caused cancer. Another judge, same thing. Monsanto made an ongoing effort to impede, discourage, and distort scientific inquiry, conscious disregard for public health. And it's jaw-dropping. But this is why you've seen billions of dollars. There were two, a husband and wife, I think it was the third trial. The jury awarded each one of them $1 billion because they were so outraged at the deception. Lee Johnson, well, I shouldn't tell you, well, maybe you know. He was awarded $289 million in the first trial. There have been billions in jury awards overall. Monsanto was very smart. Monsanto sold the company, signed the papers, and walked away in June of 2018. Very first trial with Lee Johnson started in June of 2018. And when the very first verdict came down in August of 2018, Bayer's stock price plummeted, and it's never come back, and the company is desperate to get out of the litigation now. There are several billions of dollars into this. I don't know if you've been following what's going on in DC, but they are making a huge push to get immunity into federal law now so that it would limit the ability of people to sue them and other agrochemical companies for failing to warn. This is sort of the big claim that people can bring. They're saying, you knew of the risks and you failed to warn us. And so what they have now is language that is moving through. We have language right now in the House Appropriations Bill. There was a vote on Tuesday to try to take that out, and it failed. So it's still in there. And they're trying to move it into the Farm Bill as well. But it would provide immunity for these pesticide companies. It would be very, very difficult to sue them. And they are also moving in different states now. And they've got laws passed in Georgia and North Dakota that would preempt lawsuits. And they're close to getting one in South Carolina. So people are watching that really closely. But yeah, the MAHA movement is treading those halls of Congress right now, trying to get that language out of the House. But I don't know. All of this, again, I think Monsanto's just a poster child. You get rid of Monsanto, you get rid of glyphosate. You've done a lot, but you haven't solved the problem, right? We have so many pesticides, PFAS, other chemicals that are just polluting our water and our air and our food and our bodies and causing cancers and reproductive harms. 40% of Americans, men and women in the U.S. now are expected to get cancer in their lifetimes. Several types of childhood cancers are on the rise. It's Iowa, #1 farm state for corn and eggs and hogs, and also big in soybeans and livestock. Has the second highest rate of cancer in the nation right now, and it's only one of 2 states in the U.S. where cancer rates are climbing, and they're tying it very directly to all of these chemicals that are being used in farming and several other farm states. So what are we doing about this? You guys are doing a lot about it. I've been trying to, educate people as well. These are just some data points, and I'm going to get rid of data points because it's Friday and everybody needs a cocktail. But me. Billion pounds of pesticides used in the U.S. each year, 75% in agriculture. All the science is tied these pesticides to NHL, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, multiple myeloma, pancreatic, lung, skin cancers, Parkinson's. Right? Parkinson's is on the rise right now, not just in the U.S., but around the world. More than 1,200 active ingredients, 16,000 pesticide products are being used. It's, this is what I was just telling you, 1 in every 285 American children receives a cancer diagnosis before 20. Like, that is not the way it should be. Cancer rates, it's awful. The evidence is there. We're creating this toxic legacy for our children. And, you guys are doing a lot to stop that, and we just need to spread the word on this. Parkinson's, paraquat, when I talked about early, when I opened up my comments here about paraquat being so acutely toxic and can kill you in weeks, chronic effects have been shown to do damage to the brain, central nervous system, and to dopamine-producing neurons in the brain. And you could see, if you want to Google stories, it's almost worse, maybe, than the Monsanto Papers. The internal documents that I have gotten over the last 2-3 years on paraquat and what Syngenta knew in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and how they started following the playbook and putting together tactics because they knew they were going to get sued because the evidence tying paraquat to Parkinson's disease was growing so strongly. And they too now are being sued. There are several thousand lawsuits against them around the country. More than 90% of people have pesticides. Their byproduct. All right, I'm going to quit bringing you down. Let's see. Not just us humans at risk. We know that. We have plummeting insect numbers. The insect species, pollinators, really important to us. People don't think of insects maybe as necessary important, but they are a key, link in this chain that we need to produce our food. Birds are vanishing. I'm sure you guys have read all this, and all of this can be tied to the toxins, the pollutions, including these pesticides, including glyphosate that we're using so prevalently. This is my dad, and this is my little girl, who's not little anymore. And I just love this picture because I think that this is the connection I'm talking about, right? Like it's our job to protect our youth. And we can only do that when we're engaged, we're informed, and we're out there trying to make a difference, which is like all you guys are doing. And I love just being here. My dad died of cancer 5 years ago. He was an environmental warrior. He never thought I was doing enough to speak out. So I'm very proud of him. I feel very grateful to all of you for the work that you're doing. And I think that this is a really good quote that we should all, we have to take action to make our environments for people to live and work healthy. So thank you very much for listening to all of that. My little tirade.
Carey Gillam.